into this computer. All right, hello and welcome to Real Life Wednesdays. This is April 22nd, 2020. And again, just as a refresher, we have these because um, I feel that although Interlocking does a great job of um, making great artists, sometimes we don't pay enough attention to what you do once you get in music school or what you do once you get out of music school. So a lot of these talks are talking to commercial audio professionals in the industry and figuring out how they got there and just sucking the information out of their mind grapes. So with that being said, let me introduce our guest for today. Our guest is Will Kennedy, and Will and I went to school together at Berklee College of Music. Will is a producer, an engineer, and a mixer based in Los Angeles. And he has worked on a bunch of different things, including the uh, OAR, and he's worked on U2, Michael Franti. Um, in fact, didn't you do that Hey song? Hey,
Yeah.
on the way. Yeah, that was on every single commercial about 5 years ago.
Well, it was
Um,
10 years ago, but yeah.
oh dear lord!
Yeah, I
But
know.
and currently, he was the mixer for the Zombies 2 soundtrack, which spent quite a bit of time at the top of the
Not
iTunes.
actually, just to be accurate, not the whole soundtrack, but a song called Flesh and Bone, which is sort of like the hit single off of the soundtrack.
Awesome, cool. Well, I'm going to just ask Will whether he could just drop his bio on us and a little bit, and just tell us a little bit about what you do professionally and what your everyday kind of looks like when we're not in a pandemic.
Pick a day. It's different.
Mhm.
It's, I I pretty much do what the description says. Some days I'm producing, some days I'm mixing, some days I'm engineering, some days I'm doing all three. Um, Most often these days, I work out of this little studio here. I do a bunch of, it's possible for me to do an entire record here, but it wasn't meant for that. It's pretty small, and we have obviously a lot of amazing big studios here in Los Angeles. So whenever we have the budget and the opportunity, I'd prefer to be tracking stuff at one of those and then bringing it back here to overdub and mix. Um, but yeah, I mean, what can I get specific about?
Well, I would say, uh, how about, well, let's start at how you got, well, actually, let's start with, just for people who may not know, what is it exactly that you do as a producer? Like, what's your, first of all, explain like your impression of what a producer does, and also explain like kind of your style of production, I guess.
Okay, and I should start off by saying the word producer has expanded to include a lot of other things these days in terms of record making than it used to. Um, but my from my perspective, what I do, because I come from a background of engineering production, or us, engineering mixing. That's kind of my thing. Um, when I'm producing, I can be doing everything from uh, helping out with the arrangement of songs, deciding what instruments are going to be on a tune, dealing with the budgets, booking session players if it's not a self-contained band or artist that I'm working with, um, being a psychologist for a recording session to try and get the best performances out of people. That's a huge, huge part of the job. Uh, Sometimes, I mean, overseeing mixing and supervising. Pretty much, you're in charge of the whole, all the aspects of the creative side of making the record. So if I'm not mixing the record, then I'm reviewing the mixes and giving my opinions about what I'd like to have fixed. I'm checking masters. I'm approving the order of the songs on an album if we're doing a full album. Um, Yeah, all of that.
So how did you? So did you always want to be a producer or a mixer and engineer? Where did when you were 15, 16 years old, what where did you think I want to go into professional commercial music?
I had no idea what a producer did when I was 15 years old. I had honestly, I had very little idea of what went on inside a recording studio until around the time you and I met when I was at Berkeley. I knew that probably around the age of 12 or 13, I really started falling in love with music. I played a little guitar. I was in high school band. Eventually, I'd be a trombone player. Um, and the further I got, the more I loved it. And then there was a particular concert I went to. It was actually the very first Lollapalooza tour in 1991.
Amazing.
And that just blew the top of my skull off. And I walked out of that show thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And I don't understand how all of it works, but I want to work on that kind of music somehow.
Hmm. This is
Um,
good because most of the people in this room are rock people right now, which is good.
so, and again, I grew up in a very small town, basically a farming community. No, I had nobody to talk to and say, hey, what paths do I have available to me? All they knew about a career in music was that you either taught it, or you played in a symphony orchestra, or you played in a general business band doing weddings and events. Nobody knew anything about the world of record labels and recording studios and going out and doing live sound shows, any of that kind of support stuff.
Hmm.
So it took me a little while. I had some I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that I wanted to do something for a living that doesn't necessarily provide a very stable living. And everyone was like, "Oh, you need to have a fallback," blah blah blah. So I went to college. My freshman year, I was a political science major. I was miserable. So I transferred, and then I thought, well, I'll take one step towards music, but I'll still have a fallback. And my sophomore year, I was a music education major. And by the end of that, I was so confused because I was doing music now, but I just was deeply unhappy still. So I ended up taking a couple of years off and eventually discovered Berklee College of Music. I applied, got in, which wasn't tough back then. Um, and all of a sudden, I was surrounded by this whole world of options that I had no idea existed. And at this point, I'm playing trombone. That was my major instrument. And one of the first things I did after I got to Berklee was I built a pickup for my trombone so I could run it through an effects processor and out of a guitar amplifier. And in doing that, the person I was taking trombone lessons with at Berklee said, "Hey, you should be in, we have this program uh, called the Music Synthesis Program." And this was back when synthesizers and computers weren't an everyday part of the recording studio. That was tape machines and consoles. The people that did the computers and synthesizers were weirdo nerds who you brought in only when you needed them. So, and I didn't even really understand that, but I thought, well, I'll give this a shot. It sounds kind of cool. It sounds like it's going to expand my mind a little bit. So I started doing it, and uh, the music synthesis program and the production engineering program at Berklee follow each other through the first couple of semesters. So we have to take a lot of common courses. And the more I learned about the recording stuff, the more I fell in love with it. And after a semester of looking into it and talking with a couple of our mutual friends who were in the program, I was like, you know what? That's what I want to do. And man, as soon as I started working in the studios at Berklee, I knew that this is what I was meant to do. And I just went all in on it from that point.
Hmm. So, when you um, when you were in music school, um, and you started in the program, did you? And I know that when you started the program at Berkeley, you knew that's what you wanted to do. You wanted to be in the studio and doing things. What was it? Can you pinpoint what exactly it was about producing and engineering that really drew you to it? Was it the social nature of it? Was it the fact that you were kind of like, oh, tell me. Why don't you tell me?
It was,
Instead of
uh,
me guessing, you just tell me.
No, I'm an introvert by nature. The social aspect of it was actually that's about 180 degrees the other direction. One of the things I love about it is that you're dealing with a small group of people for a long period of time.
Mhm.
So that suits my personality much more. Now, when I was getting into it, when I was becoming interested and falling in love with it, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I didn't understand that about myself. Um, but I was definitely drawn to. I didn't want to be the guy at the front of the stage. At some point in my career, somebody said to me, uh, when you think about what we do in the studio for a living and how important we are to the sort of overall success of an album, you always have to remember the artist name goes on the front cover in giant letters and ours goes on the inside in tiny letters.
Right.
And that uh, that really appeals to me. I like being the guy behind the guy, or the guy behind the girl.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll say that that also appealed to me a lot too. I didn't want to I knew I wanted to be in music, but I didn't want to be at the head of a band. I didn't want you hear all these stories about like the lives of artists being crazy and somewhat like unpredictable, and also like um, a level of success being untenable. Whereas from a producer or an engineer um, position, it seemed like it was a little bit of a steadier job, at least back then. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we probably learned pretty quickly once we were out and working that this was no more steady than than
Than
the
any other job.
yeah you if you wanted to do it and make a living at it, you had to be very good at it. You had to work really hard at it, and you were going to go through periods where you were making a bunch of money and periods where you were making no money, which in the end, I don't know what the difference is between that and being a player. I just know that I have a talent for this,
Hmm.
that I don't have for playing. People ask me if I play anymore, and I don't. And I say it, and they're, oh, that's so sad. You should play more often. Like, the studio's that's what I work hard every day on getting better at.
Right.
Because I do feel like, when I'm mixing a record, that's the musical thing that I do. I'm trying to pull out the the musical potential in whatever those tracks are. Same with producing, trying to imagine, like, okay, we talked about the song and the arrangement and all this stuff. Now how do we put all those pieces together and then pull out the best possible performances to deliver the message we're trying to deliver.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, getting to that point, a point of professionality from music school. Like you graduate from music school, and then like 20 plus years happens, and now you're working on professional records. What happened right when you left music school? What did you have trouble finding a job, or where
The
what happened?
first thing that happened after I left music school was Mark LaQuesta ruined my life.
That's me.
That's
Ah,
deeply untrue, but you do play a big part in this. Um,
okay, good.
so so I graduated. At this point, I knew. Let's put it this way: if I could have done, like, if there were no hurdles to me doing what my dream gig was, what I really wanted to do was move to the UK and work at Peter Gabriel's studio, Real World.
Yeah.
I had always dreamt of that, but when I started looking into visas and what the getting a work visa was over there and all, it just wasn't possible. And I didn't have a lot of money. I had been working 3 jobs to pay my way through school. So I had nothing. So number two on the list was, and this is, if I was going to stay in the States, I wanted to move to New York. I love New York City. Um, and that's just where I wanted to be. But as we all know, New York is extraordinarily expensive, and there was no way I was going to be able to scrape together rent
Hmm.
to
We have
even,
some students in here who have been accepted to some music schools in New York, so um,
well, good luck with the
go
money. You'll be fine with the music part.
Right. So
Um,
after that was number two.
so that was number two. There was no number three until uh, until I talked to you, and you said, "Hey, you should consider coming to Nashville." And I thought there is no way I'm going to come to Nashville.
Mhm.
But my choices at that point were to either explore that option, or I was going to have to. And I was 25 when I graduated from Berkeley. As a 25-year-old, I was going to have to move back in with one of my parents and get some crummy job to scrape together the money to be able to move to New York in 6 months or a year. And I already felt like I was starting, I was sort of behind the eight ball because I was starting my career so late. So, so I drove down to Nashville, or actually I flew down,
Mhm.
and you and I met up, and I threw a bunch of resumes around town, and I honestly did not think that this was going to go anywhere. And the next thing I know, I got a call from Ocean Way, Nashville.
Sal
And
Oliveri, right?
hmm?
Sal.
Sal Greco.
Oh, Sal Greco. Yeah.
Yeah, Sal's not the one who called me. The manager at the time there was, but I ended up working for Sal,
Okay.
and I got hired as a junior studio tech there. And the pay was better than I was expecting, and it's cheaper to live in Nashville than it is to live in New York. And I thought, well, worst case, I do this for a couple of years, save up some money, and then move to New York. Best case, this works out.
Mhm.
It didn't work out. I spent about, I don't know what it was in the end, 5 or 6 months there. Uh, the studio was in a very rough spot, so that made working there very difficult. I had some family issues around the same time. My father got very ill, and I just sort of had this moment where I realized, oh, if I want to make a living in Nashville, and this is 1999, so things are different now.
Yeah.
But if I want to make a living in Nashville as an engineer, I'm going to be working on
Country
country
music or
music,
Christian?
yeah, or contemporary Christian. It's going to be that's going to be the bulk of my income. I don't understand those genres. I don't judge anybody who does. It's just not my bag. So I didn't see how I was going to be able to make that happen, and I didn't. I mean, this is a it's a tough business to be in. The music business is hard. So you got to do it, number one, because you love it, and if you're making all these sacrifices to be able to do the thing that you love every day, why then, should I get to the last step of this where I'm trying to set out on what I'm hoping is going to be the journey of a long career, and pigeonhole myself doing music that I'm not happy working on?
Mhm.
So I picked up and moved to New York.
And also, a third thing is that, and I'll be honest, back then in 1999, Nashville kind of sucked. It
It,
was like it was not as open or liberal as it is today. Like there were racist tendencies like all along the row. Like in when I first started on Music Row, people would be like, "Have you worked with the Asian?"
the Asian, I remember that.
Yeah, because I was the only Asian working on Music Row. They'd be like, "Oh, you got to work with the Asian." So those people are all dead now. Don't worry about it. No. But
And
yeah.
that was, in all honesty, I had a lot of respect for you, because one of the big reasons I left is I couldn't deal with that attitude. I'm a I'm a white guy. I got it as easy as the genetic lottery comes in this country, and I couldn't deal with the sort of patina of racism that was there. You had to live through it, and you stuck it out for 20 some years, which is amazing.
Well, after about 10 years, it started getting
Mm,
better. I'll tell you that. Well, actually, it started, I hate to say this, but it started getting better after 9/11.
yeah.
After 9/11, we got an influx of people from New York, professionals, and they were the first ones to really come in and change the attitude of like people like all the good old boys on Music Row would say something and the guy from New York would be like, that is so not cool. Why are you saying that? And then after that, we got an influx of people from LA who are driven to Nashville mainly because it was so much cheaper to live there. And then all of a sudden, the people from New York and LA were they were the same amount of people that had grown up in Nashville and were working. And then, my last like 10, 11 years in Nashville were awesome. They were
Yeah,
really,
and I think I told you at some point I came to visit you, and the city was unrecognizable to me.
yeah,
It absolutely is not the city that I lived in, and that's great.
yeah, absolutely. So from there, you went to New York.
So I moved to New York, and I I I feel like I got really lucky. Again, just put a bunch of resumes out, interviewed with a bunch of studios, eventually landed at a really great studio. Unfortunately, it's no longer around. It was called Right Track Recording. Um, Still one of the, in terms of the studios that I worked for directly, the best run studio that I worked at. Um, Run by the manager there was a guy named Barry Bon Jovi. Barry and his brother Tony were the guys who started Power Station Studios in New York City, and their cousin is John Bon Jovi. Um, we had, guys like Phil Ramone and Frank Filippetti working there nearly every day. We were doing everything. New York at that time was heavily hip hop, so we had one room at the studio that was pretty much always doing a hip hop record, but the other two rooms, and this was a rarity in New York at the time because there was so much money in hip hop that every studio in town was pretty much doing hip hop.
Mhm.
Um, so we had one room that was doing hip hop. Then we'd have a room that was doing like a Broadway cast recording, and then there'd be a rock album going on in another room. So it was always this great mix of stuff that was happening.
Yeah,
Um,
that's amazing.
and and I learned a lot. The people there cared really deeply about making great records and making that a place where people wanted to come to make great records. So I learned a lot about, it really set a lot of the foundations for how I would behave in the studio and what I expected out of a studio when I worked there. And then I was there for about a year, and then I got sick. Um, I, I found out I had a chronic illness, um, and it was this thing where I'm making minimum wage working at Right Track. I'm working on average somewhere between 75 and 100 hours a week, if not more.
Hmm.
I have no health benefits. I am scraping together a living in New York City. I was living in Jersey City, which now anybody who's going to New York, now Jersey City is this really nice area.
It
Uh,
is? It doesn't
yeah,
smell anymore?
no, no, it's expensive. But when I lived there, it was a dump. The market near me, the best meat you could get was bologna. It was brutal. So I'm working all these crazy hours and I'm sick, and it's this kind of thing where like I find out that I have this illness and it's totally treatable, but I don't have access to healthcare. So it quickly turns into a situation where I have to decide between letting this illness eventually kill me or I got to stop working at the studio because I got to get a job that's got health benefits. So that's not there's no choice there. That's, it's choice B. So, so I had to quit, and it was one of the most disappointing moments of my life. I felt like I was right on the verge of achieving all of my dreams, and this was a great place, and I loved working with all the people there. And now I got to walk away from it. And where I ended up eventually after that was in back in Boston. I had worked part time at Harvard doing AV work when we were at school, and I ended up coming back a few years later, and I took over as the supervisor of that department. And I I had it, so I had a 9 to 5 job with health benefits and all the stuff I was looking for. I
Got
loved.
that Harvard money behind you?
Yeah, I
Living
didn't get
large and in charge?
hardly. But it was no, it was a great job. Great people. Harvard is a fantastic place to work.
Great apartment. You had a great apartment
I
there.
did have a great apartment, um, and I took that. I ended up staying there. They asked me to stay for 2 years. I ended up staying about 4.5, and I got my health situation sorted out. learned a lot about myself, met the woman who would eventually become my wife. Um, and then I was about to turn 30, and I was unhappy with my job I realized for no reason other than I just didn't want to do it anymore because I wanted it to, I didn't know whether or not I, the best way to put this, I needed to take one more shot at finding out whether or not I could run with the big dogs in the recording
I
business.
remember this conversation. I
Yeah.
remember you telling me pretty much exactly that. Yeah.
And I knew that I was probably going to have to move to LA because LA is where the music I wanted to work on was being made at that point.
And you'd already hit the other two.
And I'd already hit the other two. At first, I thought I would move back to New York, but the scene just changed so much there in the time I was away. It didn't make sense anymore. And so I talked to my then girlfriend, now wife, and we decided to pick up and move to LA. And I knew I was going to have to start from scratch. Nobody cares what you've done before when you land in a new town
Mhm.
in this business. There, unless you've done something huge, then
Right.
they. But you know,
Howard Willing did pretty well in Nashville. But he had Pumpkins behind him and Smashing
right?
Pumpkins, and he had
Yeah, people. You've got to have a pretty serious track record. You can't just get a career started and then move somewhere else and take that cred with you. You
yeah. Ryan Hewitt was already established in L.A. long before he came to
yeah,
Nashville.
you won a Grammy for a Chili Peppers record. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the people who make those moves that you've heard of can make those moves because you've heard of them.
Yes. And a great dog helps.
Yes.
If you have a great dog, yeah, and which you do, but in any case, go on. You moved to LA. And,
So
actually,
yeah,
the LA chapter, I have a question for you because I mean, like, I want you to eventually get there, but I guess I don't even know the story about this, but you were the engineer for Matt Wallace for quite a long time, or
well,
like,
that's in LA.
yeah, and how did you get that job? Because it seems like such a it's I mean, not that I don't think that you're capable, of course. Obviously you're capable, but you'd
Truth
think
comes
that
out.
every single person in the world would probably be gunning for that job. Here's a guy that worked with Faith No More with the Replacements. He had done the Maroon 5 record, which had become huge. He was I mean, he had worked with the Replacements. He'd done so many huge acts. How did you get that job?
So that happens not long after I get to LA. So we moved to LA. I bounced around a little bit. I ended up getting a job. Eventually, I realized I was going to have to get a job at a big studio again. And a friend got me a job at a studio in town called the Village Recorder, which is a very famous place. Um, I got the gig because I knew how to run tape machines at a time when most people in the entry level positions didn't, and they needed somebody they could pay very little money to do digital archiving of the Ray Charles tape library. So I got hired as like a runner at the studio, but then they sent me over to Ray Charles' place where I pulled out old Ray Charles tapes and transferred them to digital I did that for about 6 months.
Awesome.
Um, and then I worked at the Village for maybe another 6 months after that, and then it was just clear that that was not going to be the route forward for me, and I needed to kind of break out on my own and try and get some engineering gigs. And the way I made money at this point, if I didn't have a job, like when I left the Village, and even before I started at the Village when I first moved to LA, because I'd done tech work at Ocean Way and at Right Track, I knew how to build cables and just do some basic stuff. I can't repair a broken piece of gear for you unless what's wrong with it is very simple. But I can build cables and wire up a studio and all that. So I was doing that work. Um, and then I leave the Village and I'm trying to focus on engineering because I don't want to get pigeonholed as the guy you call to do your wiring work. Um, but I need money, and I get a phone call one day to do a wiring job, and it was a guy that I'd worked with on a previous wiring gig maybe 6 months before that had gone very badly. I was like, man, it's crazy this guy's calling me again. He said, listen, I've got this friend he's going to be opening up a studio. He needs someone to do the audio wiring. Would you be interested in doing it? I don't have the time. And I was like, listen, I'm trying really hard not to take these gigs, but I needed the money. So I said, I'll tell you what, because I knew it was going to take like a month. So let me meet with the guy. If he's as cool as you say he is, then it might be worth my time. But I don't want to be stuck working for a jerk for a month doing something that's already going to be making me miserable. So I go and I meet the guy, and his name was David Bianco. I didn't know who David was, but he was one of the friendliest guys that I'd ever met in my life. Ended up becoming a great friend as well. And then, so I met him. Everything goes cool. I go home, and I look up David's credits. And aside from the fact that he'd worked with a bunch of legendary artists, like Joni Mitchell, Rage Against the Machine, Fleetwood Mac, on and on and on. He worked on about 6 of my favorite records. So I called him back immediately and said, David, I will do this for you for half of what I was going to charge you if you tell me stories about making these records. Which he did. I'd be soldering late at night at the studio, and he'd sit down and I'd be like, man, tell me about working with the Posies, or tell me about working with Rollins Band. And he would. He was a great storyteller too, so that made the time go more quickly. So all of that to say, we get the studio up and running, and David, being the sweetheart he is, brings me on as his assistant. And I do that for a couple of months, and things are going well. But we had my fiance at the time and I had our wedding planned. We had to go back east for the wedding. It was in Vermont. You were there, Mark. It was scary.
Oh, I was there. It's the
So
first time I'd driven up a mountain without snow tires in the snow.
so uh, David says, listen, there's another guy that I work with who's also actually now a really great friend of mine. He said, I'm going to bring him in to finish out this record that we're working on. Then I'm going to keep him on for the next record because I want to be able to split the work between you guys. But when you get back, we need to find you a gig. I said, David, it's not your job to find me a gig. That's my issue to deal with. And he's like, no, 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 we're gonna figure something out. So I go back east, get married, come back to LA, and I get a call from a mutual friend who says, hey, David told me you're looking for a gig. I know that Matt Wallace is looking for somebody. Now, David and Matt shared a manager, so that's how they knew one another. And it was as simple as Matt was looking for someone basically just to do overdubs, simple stuff like editing work, and like, I need a backing vocal, I need a keyboard part, whatever, not like the heavy duty tracking stuff. Um, so I met with him, we had a conversation. He hired me, he brought me in, uh, and things went well. I mean, there's no other way to say it. We got along great. The work, he was happy with the work I was doing. So after a few months of doing, sort of being the second engineer, not actually assisting, but you know, um, he'd have 2 of us working on a record at any given time. So I was sort of the junior engineer, let's say.
Hmm. Tell
Uh,
me, tell me some of the and tell me some of the artists that you were working with Matt at the time. Are there any records that? Um,
well, right out of the gate, because this was 2007, I want to say. Yeah. So Matt was still kind of riding the tail end of the success that he'd had with Maroon 5, because that record had been so huge. So we were pretty much doing record after record after record. And the first one I worked on with him was an EP for this kid on Virgin Records. But then the second one, oh no, we did that. We worked with an Australian kid, and then the third record we worked on was OAR. Oh no, it was Michael Franti, and then we did OAR soon after that. Um, and both of those were very successful records. Um, and then, I mean, we were always working on a lot of stuff. We did Andy Grammer's first record. If anybody's heard of him, he had a hit back, I want to say it was like 2010. Um, but I mean, those are the big things we worked on. but we also worked on a lot of really cool stuff. We worked with this band called iAlaska that was on an independent label out here in LA. Matt actually ended up having me mix that record for him. It was the first thing I mixed for Matt. Um, we worked with a girl from Canada named Eva Avila, who had won Canadian Idol one year, incredibly talented singer. And then we ended up working with this band from Australia called Thirsty Merc, the lead singer of which is this guy named Ray Thistlethwaite, who seriously is one of the 5 most talented musicians on the planet. He's ridiculous. And that Matt and I ended up becoming great friends with Ray and still work with him to this day.
Speaking of first of all, um, speaking of Ray Thistlethwaite, I should tell everyone here that you should Google him and like check out his videos on YouTube. He's a great singer, great piano player. He's amazing. He does a lot of stuff with Knower and that crew. Um, Also, speaking of Canadian Idol, can I ask you about the just a little brief aside about your time as a producer and kind of like the one of the celebrities on the East African show Maisha Superstar?
Right. So
Which is like for students, this is like the Kenyan, like the country of Kenya, like next to Uganda, the Kenyan version of American Idol, and Will
I
was.
was I was the music producer for that. So I had been working with, this is actually a guy that we met at Berkeley, a great artist named Eric Wainaina. Um, Eric and I were attempting to do a record. We were trying to figure out how to get it funded. Eric really wanted me to come over to Nairobi to work on it, and I did too. I thought it'd be an amazing adventure. And then Eric was offered the position of music director for this singing contest show, Maisha Superstar. Now in Africa, this is 2015 is when we did this. They like here we take for granted like you're watching American Idol, somebody sings a song and you're like, oh, that's awesome, I'd like to listen to that on iTunes. You can go to iTunes and it's already up there. They've already recorded it and uploaded it. It's ready to go. But that's a lot of hard work. And I know some of the people who do that stuff, and they have 2 teams of people working in, I think, 3 different studios 24 hours a day to be able to turn those songs out to be available to the public the moment the show airs. The production infrastructure is not that great in Kenya, and they had a couple of music contest shows over there, but nothing that could do that sort of thing. And Maisha Superstar wanted to take a shot at it, so Eric said, hey, they want to do this, which means we're going to have 6 contestants. We're going to have to produce, engineer, or arrange, produce, engineer, mix, master 6 songs a week for however many weeks there were going to be all 6 people on the show, and then it would be, we'd narrow it down. The workload would get a little lighter.
By the way, I put a link to one of the videos to Maisha Superstar in the chat. You'll see Will in there just briefly. This is when they're announcing the winner of the first season. Anyway, go on.
As an aside, we shot the show on Thursday and it aired on Sunday, I believe. So I was staying with Eric and he had 2 young kids. And we would watch it together, and they would always do like the cheesy, boom camera flyover shot of the audience. And I was most often the only white guy. And his kids.
And you're bald.
And I'm bald. So his kids would be like, they're like 5 and 9 at the time. They're like, wow, it's hard to find Will in that shot.
That's awesome.
So yeah, Eric called me up and said, hey, they want to do this. We got a little bit of a budget. Do you want to do it? And we can wrap that in with working on the record once the TV show's done. So I said yes. It meant I had to basically assemble a recording studio's worth of gear in Los Angeles and then ship it over there because they didn't have access to a lot of the equipment that we needed. And then I got there and I had to build the studio when I got there.
Mhm.
Um, and then it was nonstop work for the next. The TV show lasted 3 months, and I mean, the days I had to mix because we would do the schedule was so the show would shoot on Thursday. Friday we would get together with the contestants and they tell us what they wanted to do the following week, what they wanted to perform. Saturday and Sunday, we would do tracking sessions with the house band to get all the basic tracks laid down. Monday, we do the lead vocals with all the contestants. Tuesday was any overdubs we were going to do and backing vocals. And then Wednesday was me
Mixing your
cleaning
brains
all that
out
stuff up, mixing and mastering all 6 songs
in
to
a
have
day?
in a day. And then Thursday, because Thursday morning they had to upload the stuff to iTunes to have it ready by the time the show aired the following week.
Wow.
Plus, I also had to create the backing tracks if the band needed backing tracks for anything. So while I was mixing, I was also printing out stems for them to use. And while I was doing this mixing, they're overdoing the rehearsal for the show at the soundstage. So I'm emailing tracks over to them so that Eric can have it for playback with the band rehearsal.
Boy, so this is kind of like a boot camp for producing. Like it was
Oh,
like it sounds like basic training except harder.
it was I pretty much counted on not sleeping on Wednesday nights, and most weeks I just got a few hours of sleep
Right.
that night. Um, we didn't have a day off the entire time the show was in production.
Hey,
Uh,
I should also mention, by the way, while we're talking about this, that um, a lot of these, um, like this sounds very much like um, kind of like the schedule that you would have if you were just like starting out in music. You're working long hours. Like Will had already mentioned that he was working 7,500 hour weeks when he first started his career. Those things have changed a little bit in that like there's a lot of people doing records at home. Also, people have gotten sued for really taking advantage of assistants and even interns, which we're closing in on an hour. We could talk to it for another hour, honestly, about all
yeah,
this stuff. But I want to hit you with a couple of like really quick one-shot questions, and then I'll open it up to people to ask you questions. But number one, um, I would love to say like, or I would love to ask you, um, when if you were going into music school, what kinds of if and you wanted to go work on the things that you're working on or kind of do the things that you're doing, what were the classes that were most useful for you, and what were the classes that were least useful to you?
I don't remember, at least at Berkeley, when I was doing the production engineering stuff. I don't remember a class that wasn't useful. Um, Honestly, I because I was older when we started there. I was 21 when I started school there. Uh, I was really focused on doing well,
Hmm.
and I think because of that, and because I didn't know anything about it, there were some people that had some experience with recording when they came to Berkeley, and they kind of felt like they could skip steps. I didn't. I felt like I had to soak up every bit of knowledge I could, and it's all I've used every bit of it at some point in my career. Um, and I honestly, I don't think there's anything that you can do in school, like you're going to use something at some point. My first year of college, I took 2 philosophy classes. I use lessons I learned in those every day when I'm dealing with artists.
Awesome.
um, there's nothing that you can learn that won't help you. You might feel like this is a total waste of my time. It's amazing how it'll pop up later in your life.
Right. Okay. Another question is that the music industry has changed a lot since you and I first started, and we've kind of navigated the changes. Um, Knowing what you know now about the music industry, what would you suggest that people who are just entering it, like our students who are graduating this year, what would you suggest that they pay specific focus to?
I think the best pieces of advice, I know that what everyone wants to hear and what I wanted to hear when I would ask this question is here's a step by step guide to how you get a gig. It just doesn't work that way. The best advice I can give is number one, be sure that you love to do whatever you want to do in the music business because it's going to ask a lot of you. And for a long time, you're not going to see the sort of like you're never promised financial reward out of this. You're not promised a stable life. You're doing it because you love to do it, and you just don't want to do anything else. So, really be honest with yourself about that. And then when you get out into the world, the best thing you can do, no matter, if you're coming out of Interlochen or if you go on to another music school after Interlochen, take the attitude that when you step out into the world, that you don't know anything and that you've got to learn everything from scratch, and be humble and be willing to do the smallest jobs, and be friendly and try and make some connections with people, because this business is entirely based on those connections. How the gig I got with Matt Wallace, if I had been crappy to a tech that I was working with a year before on a job that sucked, where I had every right to be a jerk, that tech doesn't call me. I don't get the gig with Dave Bianco. If I say to Dave, you know what, I just don't want to do wiring work, I'm trying to be an engineer here, then 6 months later, I'm not doing records with Matt Wallace. I don't have a platinum record on my wall. There are all of these hidden connections that when you look back, they're obvious. But at the time, you don't know that this person might be the person who's going to put you in touch with the person who puts you in touch with the person who gives you your big break. So that the humility and being kind, and obviously working hard on your craft every day, remembering that you can always get better at it, so you can put yourself in a position to take advantage of the opportunities when they arise. And if you do all those things, the opportunities will arise. You just have to have some perseverance.
Cool. What is the most your just briefly, like your most favorite project that you've ever worked on?
I don't have one.
How about one where you were like starstruck? Were you ever starstruck in the studio by anybody?
The only time I've been starstruck in the studio was the very first paying customer we had at this recording studio was Weird Al Yankovic. Of all the people I've been in the studio with, that one, like, I just got tongue-tied talking to Al. I couldn't. I was like, I have to go be somewhere else because I don't know how to be around you.
What was he recording?
He was working on vocals for the last album he put out. I think it's called Mandatory Fun.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of, I try and make, again, this is a cheesy answer, but I try and make every record I work on my favorite while I'm working on it.
Even the Zombies 2 soundtrack?
Even the Zombies 2 soundtrack.
That's a tough one to make a fun record, isn't it?
Seriously, if I can't find the fun in it, then how am I going to deliver that fun to the audience that it's meant for?
Mm-hmm. That's true.
I can say, some of the most successful records I've worked on, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but they're not necessarily records I would have bought as a fan. But if I can't be a fan of the music while I'm working on the record, then I'm doing a disservice to that project.
Absolutely.
So I've got to figure that out. And I work on so many different kinds of music, and that's part of what I find, that I love about my career, is that I'm not working on the same kind of music every day, every week. But that means that I have to be able to shift gears between, okay, I'm mixing a big band record today. What's important about this, and how do I make myself a fan of this?
Right. That's another Carl Beatty ism. He's like, you have to find something that you love about the music that you're working on every single day.
Hi, Sunday.
Come here, Sunday. By the way, I'm going to unmute everybody, and if anyone has any questions for Will, now is the time. So everyone is unmuted. If you still find yourself muted, then you will have to. Oh, wait. Then you'll have to. Oh, she doesn't want to be up here. Neither does her giraffe. So in any case, um, everyone is unmuted. If you have a question for Will or just want to ask or say anything, feel free right now. This is your shot.
Nobody.
Nobody? Anybody?
I just wanted to say that I saw OAR live like a couple years ago. They were really, really good.
They're a great band.
Yeah, they were awesome.
I assume they played Shattered.
Yes, they did. That's like one of my favorite songs of theirs. They toured with Train a couple years ago, and I went to that gig. They were really good.
Matt Wallace, who produced the record, that's the record we worked on, the one with
Yeah,
Shattered.
and I'd heard of Matt Wallace before. I think from that record. Yeah.
Yeah,
Those songs about Jane.
yeah, you should look him up. He's pretty legendary in terms of the stuff he's done.
Yeah.
And also one of the sweetest people you'll ever meet in your life. Yeah, Matt actually did it. He produced a Train record as well. That was before I was working with him. But yeah, he's had a good run in that genre of music.
Anyone else? Any other questions for Will? All right. Well, in any case, Will, I just want to thank you for spending time with us and sharing your knowledge with everybody. And I think that I hope that all the students here got something out of it. And yeah, we would love it if you would spend time talking to us either during camp or even next year during the academic year. We'd love to talk to you again and mine your brain for more experience. So
Anything for you, baby.
awesome. Well, in any case, thank you again. And yeah, so this has been another edition of Real Life Wednesdays. And tune in next Wednesday to hear another one. All right. Thanks.